What if a childless rancher in 1888 saved a 15-year-old from a brutal labor auction, only to discover she carried a crime? Lord's secrets could outthink grown men, and might be the key to saving his ranch, his marriage, and a town. On the brink, would he risk everything? The year of our Lord 1888 had been a merciless one. It came in with a blizzard that buried fences and starved cattle, and it seemed determined to go out the same way. The wind howling through the streets of Silver Creek, Montana, carried a bite that felt personal, a reminder from God that man was a fragile and temporary thing. At 45, I felt that fragility deep in my bones. My name is Elias Thorne, and for 20 years I had poured my sweat and soul into the Bitter Creek Ranch, building it into one of the largest spreads in the territory. But a legacy is a hollow thing when you have no one to leave it to. My wife Sarah was the finest woman God ever created, but the Lord in his infinite and often cruel wisdom had seen fit to keep her womb barren. 15 years of prayers, of tears shed in the dark, where I pretended to be asleep, of watching the hope in her eyes flicker and die a little more with each passing season. The silence in our grand ranch house was a living entity, a constant guest at our dinner table, a ghost in the empty upstairs rooms meant for children we would never have. The ranch hands were good men, but they whispered. I heard them. A man who builds an empire but can't father an heir is seen as half a man, a faulty seed. That's what drove me to the grim, frost-caked warehouse on the edge of town that December afternoon. It was a place of last resort, a market of human desperation. Families broken by the harsh winter, by failed crops and lost livestock, were doing the unthinkable, auctioning off their children into indentured servitude. They called it labor contracting, but we all knew it for what it was. It was a sin, plain and simple, but one that society had decided to look away from. I went there for a stable hand or a kitchen girl, someone to fill a role. Or so I told myself. The truth was, I was looking for something to fill the silence. The air inside was thick, with the smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and despair. A pot-bellied stove in the corner glowed red but did little to fight the cold that seeped through the floorboards. Men in thick coats, their faces hardened by the winter, milled about inspecting the children like they were livestock. I stood at the back, my fleece-lined coat collar turned up, my hat pulled low, feeling like a vulture circling a fresh kill. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and eyes as cold as a frozen river, paraded the children onto a makeshift stage. A boy of 10, too thin for his age, sold for $12 to a mine foreman. A pair of sisters clinging to each other went for $20 to a woman who ran a laundry. My soul ached with every rap of the gavel. I was about to turn and leave to flee this monument to human misery when he called out the next lot. Next we have a girl. Says she's 15 but looks younger. Healthy, wiry. Been working the beet fields since she was 9. Can read a bit, write her name. Good with horses, they say. They pushed her onto the platform and the breath caught in my throat. She was a slip of a thing, frail as a winter sapling. Her hair was the color of dark earth, tangled and matted, hanging around a face so pale and thin it seemed carved from ice. Her dress was a collection of patched rags, offering no real protection against the cold that had settled in the marrow of this place. But it was her eyes that seized me. I'd seen fear in the eyes of the other children, a dull, resigned emptiness. Hers were different. They were the color of a stormy winter sky, and they burned. There was no fear, no pleading. There was a fierce, cold intelligence in them, a defiant fire that refused to be extinguished. She scanned the crowd, her gaze missing nothing, calculating, judging. Bidding starts at $20, the auctioneer bellowed. 25, grunted a man near the front. I recognized him. Jedediah Croft, a small-time rancher from the North Slope, known for working his help into early graves. His ranch was a place where hope went to die. 30, came another voice. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, coiled in my gut. I thought of Sarah, of the echoing silence in our home. I thought of this girl with fire in her eyes, being handed over to a man like Croft, her spirit, to be broken under the weight of his cruelty. Before my mind had caught up with my heart, I heard my own voice, clear and steady, cut through the murmuring crowd. $100. The warehouse fell into a profound silence. You could have heard a snowflake land. $100 was a fortune. It was more than a ranch hand earned in a year. It was a statement. The auctioneer's greedy eyes snapped to me, widening in disbelief, then delight. $100 from Mr. Thorne. Do I hear 1 to 10? Do I hear 105? The silence held. No one was fool enough to challenge Elias Thorne when I had that particular look on my face. Croft shot me a venomous glare before spitting on the floor and turning away. Sold to Mr. Thorne for $100. As I made my way to the front, the crowd parted for me. I paid the man my hand steady as I counted out the bills, feeling the weight of what I had just done. He handed me a smudged piece of paper with her details. Name Elara Vance. Parents deceased influenza. No known kin. I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket, then turned to the girl. Up close, I could see the purple bruises of exhaustion under her eyes, the chapped skin on her lips. She held herself ramrod straight, a tiny soldier facing a firing squad. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I tipped the brim of my hat. "I'm Elias Thorne. You'll be coming to my ranch." She didn't flinch. Her stormy eyes met mine and held them. For a long moment she just looked at me, and I saw something in her gaze that shook me to my core. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't fear. It was pity. This child bought and sold like a sack of grain was pitying me. "What kind of work?" Her voice was a low whisper, raspy from the cold but clear as a winter bell. "General work. Around the house, the grounds. My wife Sarah will show you your duties." She held my gaze. "And if I don't want to come?" The question startled me. No one had ever asked that before. "You don't have much choice in the matter." I'm afraid I said more gently than I felt. But winter is deep, and the streets of Silver Creek are no place for a child alone. You'll freeze before the week is out. She looked around the cavernous cold warehouse at the few remaining children huddled together for warmth, at the hard-faced men counting their money. When her eyes returned to mine, a flicker of something, resignation perhaps, or a calculated decision passed over her face. "I suppose I'll come with you, Mr. Thorne." The journey to the Bitter Creek Ranch was a long, cold battle against the dying light. I had the large supply wagon, its bed loaded with sacks of flour, salt, and other provisions that would see us through the deep winter. Elara sat beside me on the driver's bench, a small, still figure wrapped in a coarse wool blanket I'd taken from the back. The wind was a physical force slicing across the open plains, carrying fine, sharp crystals of snow that stung our faces. She didn't speak for the first hour, her gaze fixed on the vast white emptiness ahead. But she wasn't just staring. I could feel her watching, observing. She noted the way I handled the team of draft horses, their breath pluming like smoke in the frigid air. She marked the landmarks, a twisted skeletal cottonwood, a ridge of black rock that jutted from the snow like a broken bone. She was memorizing the route, a cartographer of escape. The silence began to weigh on me heavier than the cold. "You planning on running off first chance you get?" I finally asked, my voice gruff against the wind's howl. She didn't look at me, her small chin tucked into the blanket. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether you bought me for work or for other reasons." The quiet implication in her words hit me like a physical blow. A hot, shameful anger rose in me, not at her, but at the world that had taught a 15-year-old child to ask such a question. I pulled the heavy team to a halt, the wagon creaking in the sudden stillness. The only sound was the wind and the jingle of the harness. I turned on the bench to face her fully. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice low and intense, "let's be clear on this. You are coming to my ranch to perform honest work. You will help my wife. You will tend the chickens. You will be warm, and you will be fed. Nothing more. Any man, and I include myself in this, who would lay a hand on a child deserves to hang from the nearest tree. Do you understand me?" She finally looked at me, her gray eyes searching my face, probing past the weathered lines and the winter stubble, looking for the truth. The intensity of her scrutiny was unnerving. After a long moment, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "All right then." We rode on. The silence that followed was different, not as heavy with suspicion. As the sun, a pale, cold disk, began to dip below the jagged teeth of the distant mountains, the world was cast in shades of blue and purple. We crested a final rise, and the Bitter Creek Ranch spread out below us. It was more a small town than a ranch. The main house, built of thick, dark timber, was a fortress against the winter, with smoke curling from its two great stone chimneys. A massive barn, several outbuildings, and the long, low shape of the bunkhouse were all dusted with snow, their windows glowing with the warm yellow light of lamps. Pastures blanketed in white rolled out as far as the eye could see, dotted with the dark, huddled shapes of my cattle. "It's big," Elara whispered, the first hint of awe in her voice. A surge of pride, something I hadn't felt in a long time, warmed my chest. "Took me 20 years to build," I said. "Of course it'll all belong to a stranger when I'm gone. Sarah and I, we haven't been blessed with children." I don't know why I said it. The words just came out a raw admission to this stranger, this child. A flicker of that same pity I'd seen at the auction crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. As we pulled up to the house, the front door opened, spilling warm light onto the snow-covered porch. Sarah stood silhouetted in the doorway. Even at 38, worn down by years of quiet grief, she was a handsome woman. Her blonde hair, streaked with silver, was pinned up, but loose strands had escaped to frame a face etched with worry. "Elias," she called, her voice tight with relief. "You're back." I was starting to worry the storm was worsening. "Just slow going," I replied, climbing down from the wagon, my joints stiff with cold. I turned and held up my hands to help Alara down. "Sarah, this is Alara Vance. She'll be helping around the house." Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the girl's ragged state. She descended the steps, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and her face softened with a deep maternal compassion that was almost painful to witness. "Oh, my lord," she breathed, ignoring me completely and addressing Alara. "Child, you look half frozen, and you're nothing but skin and bones. Probably hasn't had a decent meal in a month," I said. "I thought she could take the small room off the kitchen." "Nonsense," Sarah said, her voice brisk and taking charge. "That room is drafty and cold. She'll have the spare guest room upstairs, the one with the morning sundae." She gently took Alara's arm. "Come along, dear. Let's get you inside by the fire. We'll get you a hot bath and a proper meal." As Sarah led the girl into the warmth of the house, her arm protectively around Alara's thin shoulders, I stood alone on the porch, the cold forgotten. I had expected Sarah to be pleased with the extra help. I had not expected the fierce, desperate tenderness in her eyes as she looked at that broken child. It was the look of a starving woman who had just been handed a loaf of bread, and I felt a tremor of both hope and fear for what I had just brought into our quiet, lonely lives. Inside the house was a world away from the biting wind. A great fire roared in the stone hearth of the main room, casting dancing shadows on the polished wood floors and thick woolen rugs. Sarah was a whirlwind of activity, her movements driven by a sudden fierce purpose I hadn't seen in years. "Sit, Alara, sit by the fire," she commanded, gently guiding the girl to a large armchair. Alara perched on the very edge of the cushion, looking small and lost in its embrace, her storm-gray eyes taking in every detail of the room. The mantelpiece lined with tin-type photographs, the shelves of leather-bound books, the cheerful patchwork quilts draped over the furniture. "It's very warm in here, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, call me Sarah, dear." "We're not formal people," Sarah replied, bustling into the adjoining kitchen. "And you'll call my husband Elias. Mr. Thorne makes him sound 100 years old." I watched from the doorway as Sarah moved about the kitchen, a space that was so often quiet and orderly. Tonight it was filled with the clatter of pots and the hiss of water being poured into the large basin on the stove for a bath. She set a plate of leftover roast beef, thick slices of bread, and a mug of steaming milk on a small table and pushed it in front of Alara. "Now you eat. Don't you worry about a thing. Just get some food in you while I get your bath ready." Alara stared at the food as if she didn't trust it. She picked up a piece of bread and took a small, hesitant bite, then another, faster this time. Soon she was eating with a quiet, desperate hunger that spoke of weeks, maybe months of deprivation. Sarah chattered on as she worked, filling the silence with talk of the ranch, of the harshness of the winter, of a new calf born in the barn that morning. But I saw the slight tremor in my wife's hands, and I heard the brittle, almost feverish quality in her voice. She was pouring all of her stifled maternal love into this strange, silent child. When Alara had cleaned the plate, Sarah led her upstairs to the spare bedroom. I followed a few moments later and stood in the hallway. The room was simple but immaculate, with a sturdy pine bed covered by one of Sarah's finest quilts, a small writing desk, and a window that looked out over the snow-swept fields. "This will be your room, Sarah," said her voice soft. "I'll find you some proper clothes. I have some dresses from when I was a younger, slimmer girl. They'll be too big, but we can take them in." "Thank you, Alara," said her voice thick with an emotion she seemed to be fighting to control. I'm not used to such kindness." Sarah's face crumpled for a fleeting second, her own years of pain mirrored in the girl's quiet statement. "Every child deserves kindness, Alara," she said, her composure restored. "Now the bath is ready. Let's wash away the road." The weeks that followed fell into a strange new rhythm. Alara was everything the auctioneer had promised and more. She rose before the sun, the cold of the morning floorboards seeming not to bother her. She helped Sarah in the kitchen, her movements quick and efficient. She tended the vegetable garden in the small attached greenhouse with a knowledge that was uncanny. and she showed no fear of the livestock. Her touch with the horses, gentle but firm. But it was the change in Sarah that was the most profound. My wife, who had been drifting into a quiet, sad withdrawal, came back to life. Color returned to her cheeks. She laughed again, a sound I realized I had dearly missed. She spent her afternoons teaching Alara to sew and bake, to arrange the dried flowers she kept from her summer garden. In the evenings by the fire, she would read aloud from novels I hadn't seen her touch in years. She's a remarkable girl, Elias, Sarah told me one evening as we sat on the enclosed porch watching the snow fall in thick, silent flakes. She absorbs everything like a sponge. It's like she's starved for knowledge, for everything. Maybe too remarkable, I found myself saying. I was watching Alara in the distance, expertly helping our foreman Ben Carter wrap a poultice on a horse's leg in the barn. Sometimes I feel like she's not a child at all. It's like there's an old woman living behind those eyes. She's had to grow up too fast. Poor thing, Sarah said, a fierce protectiveness in her voice. But she's safe now. That's all that matters. I nodded, but a part of me remained unsettled. Alara was a model worker, polite and causing no trouble. Yet there were moments. I'd catch her staring out the window at the distant snow-capped mountains, her expression one of intense calculation. I noticed she always positioned herself in a room where she could see all the exits. She seemed to have a sixth sense for where everyone on the ranch was at any given moment. She was a survivor, and a survivor never truly feels safe. One evening in late January, when the winter had its teeth sunk deepest into the land, I found her in the barn. The day's chores were done, the air sharp with the scent of hay and horsehide. She was sitting in the hayloft, perched near the large open door, staring out at the landscape bathed in the cold blue light of a full moon. The snow reflected the moonlight, making the world outside almost as bright as day. A thick wool shawl, one of Sarah's, was wrapped around her shoulders. I climbed the ladder, my boots making soft thuds on the rungs. "It's too cold to be sitting up here," I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. She glanced at me, then back at the endless expanse of white. "It's beautiful," she said. "It makes you feel small." "The world has a way of doing that," I agreed, settling onto a nearby hay bale. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the sighing of the wind around the barn's eaves. "Penny for your thoughts," I said, using an old phrase of my father's. "They aren't worth that much," she replied with a wryness that was pure adult. She paused, then continued in a softer voice. "I was thinking about my parents. The man at the auction said they died of influenza. That's what the paper said." "It's true," she confirmed. "But before they got sick, they had dreams. My pa, he wanted his own little plot of land, a few acres to farm without a landlord taking half. My ma, she wanted to learn to play the piano. She had a picture of one she'd cut from a catalog." She fell silent again, her gaze lost in the moonlit distance. "I wonder if I'll ever be allowed to have dreams like that." The simple, profound sadness in her words struck a chord deep within me. "What sort of dreams would you have, Alara?" She considered the question with a seriousness that was almost unnerving in someone so young. I think I'd like to learn to read properly. Not just the Bible and almanacs, but real books. The kind you have in your study. And I'd like to understand numbers. Not just for counting change, but the kind of arithmetic that lets you understand important things. I was intrigued. "What kind of important things?" She finally turned her head to look at me, her eyes clear and direct in the moonlight. "Like how much feed a herd needs to survive a winter like this. How to know if you're making a profit or just breaking even. How to plan for bad years so you don't." Her voice faltered for a fraction of a second. "So you don't have to sell your children when times get hard." The words hit me like a fist to the gut. Here was this 15-year-old girl who had been treated as property, articulating the very core of what it meant to run this ranch, to survive in this harsh land. She understood instinctively that knowledge wasn't just a pastime, it was power. It was the wall you built between yourself and desperation. "I could teach you," I heard myself say, the words spoken before I had fully formed the thought. "If you're truly interested." Her head snapped up, and for the first time the guarded mask fell away from her face. A light pure and brilliant ignited in her eyes. "You would truly reading, writing arithmetic," I said, the idea solidifying as I spoke. "The basics of running a ranch. But it would be on your own time. After your regular chores are done." "I understand, Elias," she said, using my first name for the first time. It sounded right. "I'll work twice as hard." And so it began. Every evening after the supper dishes were cleared, and Sarah had settled in with her sewing, Alara would come to my study. The room was my sanctuary, filled with the scent of leather, old paper, and pipe tobacco. We'd sit at my large oak desk, the oil lamp casting a warm golden circle of light around us, holding the dark winter night at bay. I started with simple ledgers and basic arithmetic. She grasped the concepts with a speed that was astonishing. She wasn't just memorizing. She was understanding the logic, the why behind the numbers. She saw the story they told of profit and loss, of risk and reward. We moved on to reading. I gave her books from my own collection, Shakespeare, Dickens' histories of the country. She devoured them, her brow furrowed in concentration, her finger tracing the words as she whispered them under her breath. Sarah was overjoyed. "It's a blessing, Elias," she said one night, standing in the doorway of the study, a soft smile on her face. "To see her mind come alive like that. Every young woman should have an education." But as the winter wore on, I started to notice other changes. Sarah's maternal affection began to border on obsession. She ordered fabrics and patterns from a catalog back east, sewing Alara a wardrobe of new warm dresses. She would spend an hour in the morning brushing and braiding Alara's hair, which was now clean and shining. She began teaching her the finer points of etiquette, things she called the marks of a proper lady. Alara accepted it all with a quiet grace. But sometimes I'd see her looking at her own reflection in a mirror, at the girl in the fine wool dress, with a strange, detached expression. It was the look of someone wearing a costume, not quite believing the part she was playing. The girl who had survived the beet fields and the streets was still there, just beneath the surface, watching and waiting. The winter was deep, but I had a growing feeling that the real storms were yet to come. The first real sign of trouble arrived with a man named Caleb Rivers. We called him Cal. He was a new hand hired on in the late fall, a young buck full of swagger and cheap whiskey. He was a decent enough worker when sober, but he had mean eyes and a cruel streak when it came to the animals. I'd been meaning to let him go once the worst of the winter passed. As the weeks turned into months, Alara had begun to blossom. The hollows in her cheeks filled out, and the constant hunted look in her eyes was replaced by a quiet confidence. She was turning into a striking young woman, and I wasn't the only one who had noticed. I saw the way Cal Rivers and some of the other younger hands looked at her when they thought no one was watching. It was a look that curdled the coffee in my stomach. I made a point of keeping Alara close to the main house under my or Sarah's watch. The test came during a brutal cold snap in February. A blizzard had blown in, piling snow in massive drifts and dropping the temperature to a point where exposed skin would freeze in minutes. The hands were working in shifts around the clock, keeping the cattle sheltered and breaking the ice on the water troughs. Sarah and Alara were running the kitchen, keeping a constant supply of hot stew and scalding coffee ready for the half-frozen men. On the second night of the storm, I was in the barn with Ben Carter, my foreman, trying to save a newborn calf that was too weak to stand. Sarah had gone upstairs to fetch more blankets. That left Alara alone in the kitchen for a few minutes, which was a few minutes too long. Cal Rivers came in, shaking snow from his coat, his face flushed from the cold and likely from a flask he kept hidden in his bunk. He cornered Alara by the stove where she was stirring a large pot of stew. "Getting real pretty, ain't you?" He slurred, his voice low and menacing. He moved closer, trapping her between his body and the hot stove. "Must get awful lonely out here, just an old man and his wife for company." I found out later what happened. Alara told me herself, her voice calm and steady, as if recounting a story that had happened to someone else. She had stepped back, trying to put the stove between them. "I think you should go back to the bunkhouse, Cal," she'd said, her voice quiet. "Not till I get a little something to warm me up," he'd sneered, reaching for her. He never saw the cast iron skillet. It had been sitting on the counter, still warm. Alara moved with a speed that was shocking. She didn't swing it wildly. It was a short, brutally efficient arc that connected with the side of his head with a sickening thud. He dropped to the floor like a Polack steer, not unconscious, but stunned, his eyes rolling back in his head. She stood over him, the heavy skillet still held at the ready. "I said," she repeated, her voice as cold as the wind outside, "go back to the bunkhouse." That's when I walked in. The scene hit me all at once. Cal on the floor, groaning and holding his head where a trickle of blood was beginning to mat his hair. Alara standing over him, fierce and defiant, the skillet held like a weapon, the air thick with tension. "What in God's name is going on here?" my voice boomed through the kitchen. Cal scrambled to his feet, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "Mr. Thorne, this little witch, she attacked me. I was just coming in for some coffee, and I know exactly what you were doing, Rivers," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. My hand had instinctively gone to rest on the Colt revolver I always wore at my hip. "You're a liar and a degenerate. Get your things. You're off this ranch. Tonight." His jaw dropped. "But Mr. Thorne, there's a blizzard out there. I'll freeze to death. You should have thought of that before you decided to menace a child under my roof and my protection," I said, my voice flat and final. I drew the Colt from its holster, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. "You have 5 minutes to be off my land, or I'll drag you out myself and leave you in a snowdrift. I promise you the wolves will be kinder than I will." He looked from my face to Alara's, and he saw no mercy in either of us. He stumbled out the door, muttering curses under his breath. "This ain't over," he snarled from the porch. "Oh, yes it is," I called after him into the storm. When he was gone, I turned to Alara. She carefully set the skillet back on the counter, her hands surprisingly steady. "Are you all right?" I asked, my heart still pounding with a cold rage. She nodded. "I'm sorry for the trouble. You have nothing to apologize for," I said firmly. "You defended yourself. You showed more restraint than I would have." I looked at her at the calm, resolute set of her jaw. "Where did you learn to handle yourself like that?" "Living on the streets teaches you things," she said simply. "You learn to make people regret touching you." Sarah appeared in the doorway, then her face pale, having heard the commotion. When I explained what had happened, a furious protective fire lit her eyes. "That animal," she spat, rushing to Alara's side, fussing over her, checking for injuries. But I saw how my wife's hands shook and how she kept glancing at the windows as if expecting the storm itself to spawn more monsters to threaten the child she now so clearly considered her own. Later that night, long after Alara was in bed, Sarah came to my study. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. She stood before my desk, her arms crossed, her face set with a grim determination. "Elias, we need to talk," she said. "About what happened tonight, about Alara," she corrected. "We can't keep pretending she's just a hired girl. It's not what she is to us, and it's not what we are to her." I put down my pen and leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the quiet room. "What are you saying, Sarah? Look at her," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "She's blossoming into a beautiful young woman, and we are two childless, lonely people who love her as if she were our own flesh and blood. Don't you dare tell me you don't feel it too." Her voice broke on a sob she quickly stifled. "What happens when she's grown? What happens when some young man comes courting her and takes her away? What happens when she decides to leave and find her own life?" I had been pushing these same questions to the back of my mind for weeks. "She's only been here a few months, Sarah, and in those few months, she has become the daughter we prayed for and never received," she insisted, stepping closer to the desk. "She has filled this empty house with life." I was silent for a long time, the weight of her words settling over me. "What are you suggesting we do?" Her eyes met mine, shining with a desperate, fierce hope. "I'm suggesting we make it official, Elias. Let's adopt her, legally, make her our daughter, our heir." The idea was both wonderful and terrifying. "Sarah, she's not an orphan we found in a church. We bought her. She has no family, it's true, and she is happy here." Sarah leaned forward, her hands flat on my desk. "Elias, this is our chance. A chance for us, and a chance for her. A real home, a real family. She would inherit the ranch, everything we've built. Isn't that a better future than any she could hope for on her own?" That night, as the blizzard raged outside, I lay awake, staring into the darkness. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. I had grown to care for the girl more than I wanted to admit. She was sharp, capable, and possessed a core of iron strength that I deeply admired. But was Sarah's plan fair to Alara? Or were we just two desperate people trying to trap a bird we'd grown to love to keep her from ever flying away? The answer to my troubled thoughts came from Alara herself 2 days later. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world buried in a pristine, silent blanket of white. I was in the study with her, going over the accounts for feed and supplies, when she suddenly looked up from the ledger, her expression serious. "Elias, may I ask you a question?" "Of course. Sarah wants to adopt me, doesn't she?" My pen froze mid-stroke. I slowly set it down and looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Little things," she said, closing the heavy ledger. "The way she talks about our future. The dresses she sews that are far too fine for a hired girl. The way she introduces me to the few visitors we get. She's a kind woman, Elias. And I am more grateful for what you've both done for me than I can ever say." Her gaze was direct, unflinching. "But before this goes any further, you need to know the truth about me. The truth I wasn't entirely honest about my past when you found me. I leaned back, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. Go on. My parents did die of influenza. That was true, she said, her voice low and even. But I wasn't just living on the streets after they were gone. She took a deep breath. I was working for a man in Helena. A man named Silas Blackwood. The name sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter outside. Silas the Serpent Blackwood. I'd heard the name whispered by traders and lawmen. A man who ran gambling dens, smuggling rings, and enterprises far darker. He controlled most of the criminal underworld in the territory's capital. What kind of work, I asked, dreading the answer. Not what you're thinking, she said, quickly seeing the look on my face. I was too young for his brothels. But I was smart. I could read and write better than most of his thugs, and I was good with numbers. I kept his books. The real ones, not the ones he showed the taxman. I carried messages. I watched and I listened. I made myself useful, invisible. Why are you telling me this now, Alara? Because Sarah deserves to know who she's trying to welcome into her family, she said. Then she hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were clasped tightly on the desk. And because I think someone has been watching the ranch. My hand moved instinctively to the Colt at my hip. What do you mean? Yesterday, when I was gathering eggs, I saw a glint of light from the eastern ridge. Like sunlight off a spyglass. And 2 days ago, I found tracks in the snow down by the creek. A single rider. The horse wasn't shod like ours. He just sat there for a while watching the house, then rode off. My blood ran cold. You think Blackwood sent someone for you? I don't know, she admitted. Or maybe it's someone else. It might be nothing. But I learned a long time ago from Silas to pay attention when things don't feel right. I stood and walked to the window, my eyes scanning the pristine white ridge she had indicated. It looked empty, peaceful, but she had planted a seed of doubt that was now taking root. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I hoped I was wrong, she whispered. And because I was afraid you'd send me away if you knew the truth. I turned back to face her, to the child who carried burdens no adult should have to bear. Alara, what you did to survive does not define who you are now. But this man Blackwood, is he the kind of man to hold a grudge? He doesn't like loose ends, she said grimly. And I know where all his money is hidden. That evening after supper, I called my foreman, Ben Carter, into the study. Ben had been with me for 15 years. He was a tough, quiet man whose loyalty I trusted as much as my own right arm. Ben, I want you to quietly set up a watch rotation, I told him, keeping my voice low. I want a man on the ridge and another in the barn loft 24 hours a day. Someone's been scouting us. Ben's weathered face, usually calm, grew hard. Trouble, boss. I think we need to be prepared for it, I said. Tell the men it's rustlers. No need to cause a panic. After he left, I found Sarah in the kitchen humming softly as she mended one of my shirts by the warmth of the stove. I sat down across from her at the small kitchen table and told her everything Alara had said. I watched her face carefully as I spoke, expecting fear, perhaps even anger. She listened in silence, her needle never pausing in its steady rhythm. When I finished, she bit off the thread, set the shirt aside, and finally looked at me, her blue eyes clear and resolute. Does this change how you feel about her, Elias? She asked. No, I answered without hesitation. If anything, it makes me respect her more. She survived things that would have broken a grown man. Then it doesn't change how I feel either, Sarah said, her voice firm as bedrock. That child has been through hell. If trouble is coming for her, then it's coming for us. We will face it together as a family. A wave of love and admiration for my wife washed over me. For all her quiet ways, Sarah possessed a spine of pure steel. There's something else, I said. I don't think we should push the adoption idea right now. She needs to feel like she has a choice, not like she's being passed from one owner to another, trapped in a gilded cage. Sarah's face fell, but only for a moment. Then she nodded, understanding. You're right, she said. Her safety and her happiness must come first. She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. But you need to know, Elias. That girl has brought me back to life. She has given me a purpose I thought I had lost forever. I know, I said, squeezing her hand. She's done the same for me. The trouble came 3 nights later. It came on the back of a silent, breathless cold under a moonless, star-dusted sky. Elora, who had taken to sleeping as lightly as a cat, heard at first the faint, rhythmic crunch of many hooves on frozen snow, a sound that didn't belong to the night. She didn't scream or panic. She slipped from her bed, a shadow in the darkness, and ran to our room, her small, urgent fist pounding on the door. Elias riders. They're coming fast from the east. I was out of bed in an instant, my heart slamming against my ribs. I grabbed the Winchester rifle I kept by the bed, my mind already racing. "How many?" "I saw at least 8, she said from the hallway, her voice a tense whisper. Sarah was already out of bed, pulling on her thick robe, her face pale but calm in the dim light. "Is it Blackwood's men?" "It doesn't matter who it is," I said, pulling on my boots. "We defend our home." I sent Sarah to the back of the house to wake Ben and the other hands in the bunkhouse via the dinner bell, one long sustained ring, our prearranged signal for an attack. Ilara and I took positions at the front windows of the parlor. In the faint gray starlight reflecting off the snow, we could see them, a line of dark figures on horseback spreading out, forming a semicircle around the main house. They were professionals, not common bandits. "Ilara," I said, my voice low and steady as I chambered around. "There's a double-barreled shotgun in the kitchen pantry. Do you know how to use it?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Good. Watch the back door. Don't let them get in from behind." As she moved like a ghost toward the kitchen, she paused at the edge of the window's light and peered out into the darkness. Her body went rigid. "Elias," she breathed, her voice tight with a dreadful recognition. "The man in the lead. It's Cal Rivers." A cold, hard fury settled in my chest. The hand I had fired, the snake I had cast out, had returned with friends. The attack began not with a gunshot, but with Cal's voice, raw and ugly, cutting through the frigid air. "Thorn, send out the girl. Blackwood just wants what she stole. Give her to us and we'll ride out. Nobody has to get hurt." My answer was the roar of the Winchester. I aimed high, splintering the branch of a pine tree above Cal's head. The message was clear. "You're trespassing, Rivers," I bellowed from the window. "Get off my land while you still can." "This ain't about you, old man," he screamed back. "It's about the girl and the ledger she took. She stole from Silas Blackwood, and he always collects his debts." I glanced toward the kitchen. A ledger. She had taken something tangible. Insurance. And now they were here to cash the policy. The night exploded. The first shots came from the attackers. Orange flashes in the darkness, bullets thudding into the thick timber walls of the house. From the barn loft, Ben Carter and another hand returned fire, their rifles cracking in the still air. The attackers by the barn were driven back into the shadows. Glass shattered in the dining room. Someone was trying to break in through a window. I heard the solid, deafening boom of the shotgun from the back of the house, followed by a man's scream of agony. "Ilara," I yelled. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice steady. "He's not getting in." The fight raged on, a chaotic symphony of shouts, gunfire, and breaking glass. It felt like an eternity, but it could only have been 30 minutes. We had the advantage of cover, but they had numbers. The hands in the bunkhouse were now returning fire, creating a crossfire, but the attackers were dug in, determined. Finally a lull. Cal's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. "Thorn, I'm coming in under a white flag. Let's talk." I considered it. A trick, maybe, but the relentless assault had stopped. "Come ahead, Rivers," I yelled back. "But keep your hands empty." And in the air he dismounted and walked slowly toward the front porch, a dirty white handkerchief held aloft. He stayed just outside the pool of light from the broken parlor window. A smart move. "This is getting us nowhere, Thorn," he said, his voice strained. "We can sit here all night and pick you off one by one, or we can burn you out. Just give us the girl and the ledger, and we're gone." "What makes you think I'd ever hand over a child to scum like you?" I snarled. Before he could answer, Ilara stepped out onto the porch behind me. She held the shotgun cradled in her arms, its twin barrels looking like two black hollow eyes in the darkness. She was calm, composed, terrifying. "Cal," she said, her voice carrying easily in the cold air, his face visible in the faint light twisted into a mask of hate and lust. "There you are, you little hellcat. You caused a world of trouble." "You caused your own trouble," she replied, her voice level. "What does Blackwood really want? You know what he wants. That little account book you took when you ran." I looked at Ilara, surprised. She kept her eyes fixed on Cal. "And if I give it to him, then you're free to go." Cal said, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "Blackwood don't want you. He's got a dozen girls prettier than you. He just wants his property back. The book is his property." Ilara was silent for a long moment, the wheels turning in that sharp mind of hers. The ledger was hidden upstairs, sewn into the lining of the ragged dress she'd worn when I first saw her. It was her only leverage, her only shield. But now it was the very thing that could get us all killed. "All right," she said finally. Her voice was so firm it startled me. "But I want something in return." Cal laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You ain't in a position to bargain, girl." "Aren't I?" She gestured with the shotgun barrel toward the darkness where his men were hidden. Your men are pinned down. My father's men know this land like the back of their hands, and they are very good shots. You might eventually win, but it will cost you half your men. Are you willing to explain those losses to Silas Blackwood over a single book? My heart swelled with a fierce pride. My father's men. Cal's confidence faltered. He knew she was right. What do you want? He grumbled. A guarantee, Ilara said, her voice like ice. I give you the book. You and your men ride away and never set foot on this ranch again. And you tell Silas Blackwood that I was killed in the firefight. An unfortunate casualty. And why would he believe that? Cal sneered. Ilara's lips curved into a grim, cold smile. Because you're going to bring him a piece of my dress stained with my blood as proof. The negotiation was tense, but Cal, seeing his options dwindling, finally agreed. Ilara went upstairs. She returned moments later with the small leather-bound ledger. She also had a strip of fabric torn from her old ragged dress. With a small knife from her pocket, she made a shallow, deliberate cut on her own forearm, wincing only slightly as she squeezed the blood onto the cloth. She handed the book and the blood-stained rag to me, and I threw them off the porch into the snow at Cal's feet. He picked them up. As he and his men prepared to ride off into the darkness, he looked back at Ilara, his expression a strange mix of fury and begrudging respect. You could have had a nice life in Helena, girl. Why choose this? Ilara looked back at the bullet-scarred house, where Sarah was now standing in the doorway. She looked at me standing protectively at her side. She looked out toward the barn and the bunkhouse where the men who had just risked their lives for her were watching. Because this, she said, her voice clear and strong as home. In the aftermath of the attack, a profound quiet settled over the ranch, broken only by the sound of hammering as we repaired the damage. We buried one of our own, a young hand named Billy, who had been caught in the crossfire near the bunkhouse. The loss was a stark, cold reminder of the price of our victory. The crisis had burned away. All pretense, all uncertainty. It had forged us into something new, something stronger. We were no longer just a rancher, his wife, and a hired girl. We were a family tempered in blood and gunpowder. A week later, on a clear, cold evening, we were all gathered in the main room. The broken windows were boarded up, waiting for the glazier to make the long trip from town. The fire crackled a cheerful sound in the scarred room. Sarah brought the subject up, the unspoken question that had been hanging in the air since the night of the siege. Ilara, dear, she began, her voice soft but firm. We need to talk about your future. Ilara looked up from the book she was reading, one of my treatises on cattle breeding. What about it? Well, Sarah said, exchanging a look with me. You are not a servant here. You are not a guest. We were hoping you would consider becoming a true member of this family. You mean adoption? Ilara stated, not as a question but as a fact. If that is what you want, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't hide. But we want you to understand what it would mean. It would mean this is your home forever. You would be our daughter. You would inherit this ranch, this land, everything we have. It comes with responsibilities to the land, to the people who work it. Ilara closed her book carefully and placed it on the table beside her. She looked at me, then at Sarah, her gaze deep and searching. Can I ask you something first? Anything, Sarah breathed. Why did you really buy me that day, Elias? I took a moment to gather my thoughts to find the honest truth. Honestly, child, I'm not entirely sure. I saw the desperation of that place, and it mirrored the desperation in my own heart. But then I saw you. I saw the fire in your eyes. It reminded me of myself when I was a young man with nothing but grit and a will to survive. I respected it. And I saw a child who deserved a hell of a lot better than the hand life had dealt her. I saw a daughter, Sarah added, her eyes shimmering with tears. I wanted to save you. Ilara nodded slowly, a profound understanding dawning on her face. Then yes, she said, her voice clear and steady. I would be honored to be your daughter. But on one condition. What is it? I asked. I want to earn my place, she said firmly. Not just be given it. I want you to teach me everything, Elias. Not just the books, but how to read the cattle, how to manage the men, how to make this ranch grow. I want to prove that I am worthy of the Thorn name. She paused, and a new passionate light entered her eyes. And I want to help others. Other children like me. The ones who are lost, who have no one. Sarah let out a small sob of pure joy. The idea took hold of me, a spark in the darkness. What do you have in mind? I asked, leaning forward. What if we started small? She said, her words tumbling out now, the idea taking shape. There are so many children left behind by this harsh winter. We have so much space here. What if we took in one or two? Gave them a home, taught them a trade. Gave them the chance you gave me. It's a wonderful idea, Sarah said immediately, her face radiant. It would be expensive, I cautioned, my practical mind taking over. And dangerous. We'd have to be careful who we brought into our home. I can help with that, Alara said, her voice filled with a new authority. I know how to read people. I know how to spot the survivors, the ones with a spark worth saving. I know how to avoid the ones who will only bring trouble. We talked late into the night, the three of us. The fire burned low, but a new warmth filled the room, a warmth that had nothing to do with embers. We were no longer just planning the future of a cattle ranch. We were planning the future of a sanctuary. By the time we went to bed, the boards on the windows didn't seem like scars anymore. They looked like the start of new construction, the foundation of a legacy far greater than I had ever dared to dream. 5 years later, the winter of 1893 arrived with a gentler touch, but the Bitter Creek Ranch was a changed place. It was no longer quiet. It bustled with the chaotic, vibrant energy of life. I stood on the front porch watching Alara, now 20 years old, and the undeniable heart of our home greet a wagon coming up the lane. She was no longer the frail sapling I'd bought in a cold warehouse. She stood tall and confident, her movements graceful, and assured, a woman who knew her worth and her purpose. Beside her, a boy of about 12, with suspicious eyes and clothes that were clean but well-mended, watched the newcomers. His name was Marcus, and he had been the first child we'd taken in after Alara. He was now her shadow, her most devoted student. More strays from the city, I asked, joining her on the porch. The cold air felt crisp and clean. The Children's Aid Society sent word, she replied, her gaze warm, as she looked at the two small figures huddled in the back of the wagon. A brother and sister. Their parents died in a mine collapse. They have nowhere else to go. Over the past 5 years, we had taken in 15 children. Some, like Marcus, had stayed, becoming permanent members of our sprawling, unconventional family. Others had moved on once they were of age, armed with an education and a trade, ready to make their own way in the world. All of them had left their mark on us, and we on them. The ranch had never been more prosperous. Alara's sharp mind for business and her innovative ideas about crop rotation and breeding had increased our profits by a third. She had a gift for management, a way of earning the respect of the crustiest old ranch hands and coaxing the trust from the most damaged children. Sarah came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. At 43, she looked 10 years younger than the woman who had greeted Alara on this same porch 5 years ago. The lines of grief on her face had been softened by laugh lines. Her life was full. "Are they hungry?" she asked. It was always her first question. "I imagine so," Alara said with a smile. "It's a long, cold ride from Helena." As the wagon stopped, Alara walked down the steps. The new boy, who couldn't have been more than 10, looked at her with a defiant glare. "Are you the one they call the Winter Child?" he asked, using a nickname that had spread through the territory's orphanages, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and awe. "My name is Alara Thorne," she said gently, "and right now all I want is for you and your sister to come inside and have some of Sarah's hot stew. And if we don't want to stay," the boy challenged. "Then you don't have to stay," Alara replied calmly. "This is a home, not a prison. But before you decide, let me show you something." She led them not to the house, but to the large new workshop I had built next to the barn. Inside, David, a lanky 18-year-old we'd taken in 3 years ago, was expertly hammering a glowing piece of iron on an anvil. He was our blacksmith now. "New arrivals?" David asked, grinning. "This is Liam and his sister Rose," Alara said. "David, why don't you tell them what you thought of this place?" "Your first week," David laughed, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "I spent the whole week trying to figure out the angle, planning my escape. I was sure it was some kind of trick that the other shoe was about to drop." "What changed your mind?" Liam asked, his suspicion warring with his curiosity. "They kept their word," David said simply, his voice earnest. "They said I was free to leave. They said they'd teach me a trade. They said they'd treat me with respect. And they did. Every single day." He gestured around the workshop at the tools that were now his. "Been here 3 years. Next spring, Elias and Alara are co-signing a loan for me to open my own smithy in town." Liam looked from David to Alara, his tough exterior beginning to crack. "And they don't ask for anything improper," he whispered. "Never," David said fiercely. "The Thorns are good people. They saved my life." Later that evening, the new children fed and settled in the expanded bunkhouse we now called the schoolhouse Alara. sat across from me at my desk in the study reviewing the accounts. "You realize what we've built here, don't you?" I said, looking up from my paperwork. "A profitable cattle ranch," she replied, a teasing glint in her eyes. "More than that," I said, my voice filled with a quiet awe. "We've created something that will outlast us. A legacy of hope. These children, they'll go out into the world and carry the best of this place with them." She set down her pen. "Do you ever regret it, Elias?" That day in Silver Creek, I considered the question seriously. Not for a single second. It was the best $100 I ever spent. I paused. "But I have to ask you the same. Do you ever regret coming with me?" "Never," she said, her voice firm. "You and Sarah gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, a family. And now you're helping me give that same gift to others." She was right. The silence in our home had been filled not just with the noise of one child, but with the voices of many. The empty spaces in our hearts had been filled to overflowing. The frail girl I had rescued from a cold warehouse had in turn rescued us all. 15 years after that fateful day in the autumn of 1903, the name McKinnon Ranch was known throughout Montana, and not just for its prize-winning cattle. It was spoken of in the halls of the state capitol in Helena, and in the grim orphanages of the cities. They called it the McKinnon Miracle. I was an old man now, my hair the color of snow, my movements slower, but my heart was full. I stood on the porch of our home watching a crowd of well-dressed people from the Capitol who had come to see our work firsthand. The governor himself was among them. The woman addressing them was not the girl I had bought, nor the young woman who had taken over the ranch's books. She was Rebecca Harrison, 30 years old, a figure of grace, strength, and quiet authority. She had married James Harrison, a good, steady man, and a local doctor 2 years prior, but she had kept her name on the ranch's deeds and her hand firmly on its reins. "What you see here, ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca was saying, her clear voice carrying over the crowd, "is not the result of one person's charity. It is the result of a simple belief that no child is a lost cause. It is what happens when you give children what they truly need. Not just food and shelter, but education, opportunity, and the unwavering knowledge that someone believes in them." The governor, a portly man with an impressive mustache, stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrison, your success rate is unprecedented. We understand that over 90% of the children who have passed through this ranch have gone on to become productive, law-abiding citizens." "That's correct, Governor," Rebecca replied. "But the real measure of our success is standing right here." She gestured to the crowd around them, a crowd filled with the faces of our children now grown. Marcus Thompson, the suspicious boy who was her first charge, was there. He now owned a successful freighting business. Sarah Martinez, a fiery girl who had arrived sullen and angry, was now a respected schoolteacher in Silver Creek. David, the blacksmith, stood with his wife and their own young son. Dozens of them had returned for this day. "They taught us that our past did not have to be our future," Sarah Martinez told the governor, her voice ringing with passion. "They showed us how to build a life, not just survive it." As the dignitaries toured the workshops, the schoolhouse, and the bustling barns, Rebecca found me on the porch. She stood beside me and we watched the scene together. "Are you proud of what you've built?" I asked her, my voice raspy with age and emotion. "Proud of what we've all built," she corrected, gently slipping her arm through mine. "Sometimes I still think about what would have happened if you hadn't been in that warehouse in Silver Creek." "But I was," I said, "and you were brave enough to trust a stranger." She nodded, her gaze drifting to a group of our current residents, the youngest a girl of 8, with eyes as haunted as Rebecca's had once been. I saw Rebecca watch her with a deep, knowing empathy. "We made a difference, didn't we, Elias?" she asked softly. "Look around you, child," I said, my eyes sweeping over our legacy, the prosperous ranch, the confident faces of the children we had raised, the memory of my beloved Sarah, who had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 winters before, her heart full. You tell me. That evening, long after the visitors had departed, our sprawling family gathered for supper in the great dining room. Rebecca stood at the head of the table in the place that had once been mine. She raised her glass. "To the ones who came before," she said, her eyes finding mine. "And to the ones who are yet to come. To second chances. To chosen family." A chorus of voices, young and old, echoed her toast. To chosen family. As I sat there, surrounded by the warmth and the noise and the love that filled my home, I thought back to that cold, desperate man I had been standing in a warehouse bidding on a child with fire in her eyes. I had thought I was saving her. I never could have imagined in all my days that in truth she was saving me. She was the daughter of my heart, the heir to a legacy not of land or cattle, but of hope. She was the winter child, and she had brought an everlasting spring. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now, tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.